I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Marius de Vries, composer for Coda. Marius, this score features beautiful piano and string elements, which I'm such a sucker for because they always elicit this very strong emotion. Why do you think they're so effective in eliciting emotion in such a visceral way?
I mean, strings are just a go-to standard emotional instrument, not so much perhaps in the way that they sound, but because of the history that they have as being central to narrative film music. But I think the instrumentation here was very much suggested by the simplicity of tone that we were going for in the movie as a whole, and that in turn was driven by the fact that the performed music in the movie is recorded all live on set and very simply. There's not a great deal of clever, or invisible orchestration going on top of those. And so in order for the score to kind of dovetail with that, especially in a movie where the first half is almost absent any score, because we wanted to let the deaf communication scenes play clear of music to begin with. So the sort of what you're experiencing as the emotional simplicity of the arrangements was really dictated by the fact that they had to work with the performed music, and also by the fact that as we discovered what it meant to have a relationship between emotionally supportive music and effectively silent dialogue scenes, it's a very different experience to writing under dialogue. And we found ourselves working very hard to try and do the job as simply as possible.
Yeah,
and sometimes, sometimes the simplest way of presenting a cue when it needs to sound organic is to go to piano and a small string section, which feels like, base camp for all of the bigger things you can do.
That's right, exactly. And given this film is about a deaf family and their daughter who yearns to sing, I was conscious that the score did take a bit of a backseat towards the beginning of the film, and then really starts to ramp up as she starts to find her calling, so to speak.
Yeah,
so
that's exactly. That wasn't what we started out doing. I mean, I didn't want to seem lazy to Sian, who and I was working with her for the first time, so I wrote all the way through it. But then it became sculpting. We just were taking stuff out entirely at the beginning, and the cues in the second half were too complicated and over orchestrated. So we started to thin those out, and eventually we found a shape where, as you said, the score kind of starts to bleed subliminally into the film. And then by the time she's finding her feet as a singer and a musician, you start to notice the fact that the musical world of the film has become richer.
Yeah, I'm glad that ended up being quite intentional, because it really allowed us to immerse ourselves in this world that many of us aren't really familiar with. The score is very uplifting, though. For example, the track "Going to Boston" is one of my faves. Can you talk us through the primary inspiration for designing a track like "Going to Boston," which is very uplifting, and it's kind of pretty emblematic of what the score represents to listeners like myself?
Going to Boston and that later cue that's called "Wait, Wait, Stop, Stop," they're kind of two of the longer cues in the second half. And we've got a movie which is so full of songs, either performed or needle dropped, that I kind of wanted the longer major score cues to also feel written in that language. So those cues are composed in sort of songwritery blocks, like you could imagine a verse, bridge, chorus sort of map of those cues, and I just wanted to do that so that there was a link between the needle drops and the score, and it didn't feel like we were just careering between narrative songs and super flexible underscore. So I wrote those from with a bit of a songwriting head on, and then sort of edited them into place. So that was the first point of inspiration, and the second was really just to stick with a very uncomplicated, organic sort of choice of instrumentation, because that kind of reflects the thoroughness with which Sean approached every department in the film in terms of authenticity and striving for, streamlined and simple storytelling.
And yet, like you say, uncomplicated. Some of the uncomplicated melodies created for a film like this are super effective. So there's a really rich kind of ambient string element to some of the tracks, like Ruby's theme. The piano always evokes that emotion, as we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I also started thinking, looking back at your career, you've had a very varied career. You've written, arranged, produced across a wide range of styles and genres. Would you say Coda is perhaps the closest you've come to, as you say, an uncomplicated traditional orchestral score for a film?
Yeah, totally. And it was difficult to begin with because I guess in a lot of what I've done, it's been loud and complex and strange and sometimes abrasive, and this was Sean really encouraged me to pare that back, and I think that was good for me. It's a truism which I'm sure we'd all agree, which is that sometimes simplicity is the most difficult thing to achieve, and it's a thing which you become successful at a lot later than some of the more extravagant gestures that we're all capable of. So that's one of the reasons I valued this project. And moments where I'd be sitting down sort of playing a cue back for Sean, and she'd say, it's kind of all right, but we just need to simplify it. And eventually sometimes it would just be one piano note and she'd say, you're close, but it's still too much. There's only one place to go from there.
Basically, all right, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
But I wonder also, given that this is not necessarily in your wheelhouse and you really had to stretch as a musician, or not even stretch, but kind of compact yourself, so to speak.
Yeah.
Were there any scenes in particular, especially towards the end of the film, that you struggled with because you wanted to go big, as you say, and then you were pared back to something that you're not comfortable with normally?
It was never a struggle because it was just such a healthy and positive and friendly collaboration, both with Sean and with my production partner on this film, Nikolai. So it was never painful, but it was certainly challenging. And I'd written so much music for the film by the time that we started to zero in on this approach that I was never stuck for ideas, because there was always something there. It was just always too big and too long and too wide and too loud and those things. So it was always possible to pare something down out of what we had, but there was a lot of hard work and attention that went into that that throwing away of elements.
Yeah, was it ever not challenging in terms of how you're going to get to it, but letting stuff go, given that you're accustomed to innovating and being different and loud, as you say, maybe even slightly abrasive or unexpected? Is it difficult as a composer to let stuff go and just kind of pare back something that you've created?
Yeah, it can be difficult, but it's also such a good lesson. I mean, none of us are paid really, honestly, to show off. We're there at the service of something greater than ourselves, and this was a great reminder of that.
And finally, you've mentioned needle drops. I think in this day and age, a lot of scores seem to be really intertwined with what the music supervisor is bringing to the movie as well, when they come up with these amazing songs that many of us either don't know or that trigger memories. So Is it a difficult process, especially someone of your experience, to really ensure that the compositions that you're creating are perfectly melded with these needle drops that are coming through the film?
Yeah, I think back to the first movie that I ever worked on in any substantial way, which is Romeo and Juliet, which was an exercise in exactly that. So I mean, I learned from a master in working with Baz Luhrmann, and so in a way, not only do I find that not problematic, but that's become very much part of the currency in which I work, is the balance between score and songs and the way they can talk to each other, and indeed the way that you can take either melodic or textual elements from the songs and use that in the score so that something gets woven together that makes sense as an overall piece. So I got thrown into a very deep end back in 1995 or whenever it was on that movie, and I learnt from that.
Yeah. Yeah, just bringing me back to that film. That was such a highlight.
25
Marius, thank you so much for
years.
25 years. I remember being in the cinema. I was just a young boy. Marius, thank you for joining us today. We want to bring you back for our group panel chat shortly.
Absolutely, my great pleasure.
I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Arthur Sharpe, composer for The Electrical Life of Louis Wain. Arthur, you have often worked with your brother, Will Sharpe, who co-wrote and directed this film set in Victorian London about the titular 19th century artist. What's the upside to working with someone that you are so close to, both professionally and obviously personally?
I think the upside, in a way, is you can kind of talk back. I can kind of talk back to more than you often would dare with a director that you've only just met, or sometimes not even met in person, in this day and age especially. Not in a sort of upstart, you don't know your place kind of way, but it just, there is already a natural dialogue between the two of you, so you can say, is this the right thing, or are you 100% sure about that, or do you mean that, and so on. And you're not worried about angering them or frustrating them or getting fired or whatever it might be. It's basically you're already in a safer space, I think, and I think as a result of that, you do have more room to experiment and sort of dare to make mistakes that end up, getting you in a righter place than you would have been had you not sort of made that mistake in the first place. I guess that's probably the biggest advantage.
That's fascinating to me, because I always wondered, like, if, for example, if I was working with my sibling on a creative project, would it go pear-shaped, or would it be, a really great experience? I think what you're saying is you're able to kind of stretch a bit more and do things, perhaps take risks and so forth. And so do you find that your work excels in a certain way because you're in that safe space where you can really do some really special stuff that you maybe would not have had the chance to do otherwise?
I think quite possibly. I don't, whatever I'm working on, I'll always want to try and be brave and, not just be generic or whatever it is, as best I can. But I think you are less afraid, and from being less afraid, you maybe do without thinking, take it that little bit further and so on. I think with Will specifically, he considers the music such an important part that it really makes a difference, that he wants the music to kind of excel and shine in certain moments. And we start talking, when he's still working on the script at that kind of stage, because he kind of wants every element. It's not just the music, every element, the costume, makeup, design, production design, etc. He wants all of that to come together at the same time, starting way back when he's first conceiving of an idea, right up until the finished product. So I think in that way, that it's definitely the importance he puts on it really helps me, and as it would any composer, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. This film has a really charming, playful, even kind of retro aesthetic, the 4:3 aspect ratio and the titles, the look and the feel. And the music really fits in with that style, in my opinion. It's whimsical and uplifting and melodic. So was that the intention? What was your primary brief when you started working on the score?
I really can't even remember what the primary brief was, but I think in essence, yes, I think what we wanted was, we didn't want to write a period, a score for a period film, just full stop. In the same way that he didn't want the film to just be a period film, he wanted to find ways to, color it in different ways, and music was one of the ways that he wanted, that to happen. But at the same time, he didn't want it to just ignore the fact that it was set in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Fortunately, we were dealing with a subject that was, for some people, kind of before his time, especially with the later psychedelic cat pictures. They don't look like they were early 1900s art. It looks like something from this day and age kind of thing. And also the theme of electricity being such a big thing in the film and in Louis's mind. Both those elements kind of almost gave us an answer in a way of how to simultaneously nod to the period. We have ordinary, more sort of traditional orchestral elements, strings and woodwinds and so on, but then alongside that we've brought in the more modern tastes like the theremin and sort of electrical kind of atmospheres and sounds to give it a kind of, it's not quite this, it's not quite that feel, which hopefully is kind of what's matching that whimsical tone of the film, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because I, to my untrained ears, I always try to pick out what the primary instruments are that are being used. And there's some really emotionally evocative string work in your compositions for this film. And many of those key motifs are at that higher pitch. And I'm thinking, that sounds like a theremin to me. Is that a theremin? I'm so glad you mentioned it, because I didn't want to look like an idiot. But what was the thinking behind utilizing that kind of sound, particularly in the track, for example, Electricity? That beautiful string motif is very, it's very critical in that particular piece.
I think Electricity may actually have no theremin in it. There is, because I did also use a musical saw, and the way that the specific saw player, his name's Austin Blackburn, he's amazing, plays the musical saw. It's not quite like how normal people play it, where they sort of bow it and then let it wobble and let it sort of ring out in that way. He kind of plays it like a violin. So the saw kind of sat there between strings and the theremin in the way it sounds. Sorry, what was the original question again?
Like, what was the thinking behind using something like the saw and the theremin?
Sorry. So I think going back to that, there was the idea of the electricity. We didn't necessarily want the theremin to equal electricity, but the idea of using electrical elements, I think, was one thing. It's also just how emotive it can be. Both instruments, theremin and the saw, are often, not always, but like can be sort of seen as just weird, eccentric instruments, at times comic, sometimes used, especially the saw a bit more than the theremin, but both of them to some extent as kind of novelty instruments. And in the same way, Louis was kind of seen a bit as a novelty to some people at the time, an eccentricity just to kind of laugh a bit about, or just consider a bit odd, and that's the end of it. And I think the film sort of wants to show the really human side of Louis, the sweet side, the side that cared, the side that loved, the side that tried to sort of bring joy to the world. And I think similarly was kind of a challenge where we wanted, Will and I, to make the theremin, to make the musical saw, discover how emotive both those instruments can be. The theremin can sound so beautiful and emotive, and it's so often used to mean sci-fi or space and so on. There's nothing wrong with that, obviously. But I think we wanted to really explore what these instruments could do on a really human and emotional level, and see bring out the sweet side of them, I guess, in the same way that hopefully the film does with Louis.
Yeah, absolutely. The theremin sound and that high pitched sound can often be utilized so that it's kind of like strange or otherworldly, as you say. But in this film, it actually it's a very effective way to kind of, without sounding cliche, tug on the heartstrings That's a horrible thing to say, but it absolutely does that for this film. And what I love the most is that towards the end of the film becomes more poignant and melancholy, obviously as Louis Wain ages. And then the ending, without spoiling it, it's humming in this electrical color. It's just a beautiful way for the film to end. And your music is critical to that emotional kind of payoff. I'm just wondering if you could talk us through the more the more melancholy and poignant side of the score.
I think, thank you, first of all, that's really complimentary. I think I naturally write things that are quite melancholy. And so often, even when I think I'm writing something happy, sometimes people say, okay, can you write something happy? And I'm like, this is really happy. And so that's really, really sad. Are you okay? Kind of thing. So I think it was that sort of in me already. And I think we wanted to bring that out. I don't think I think you mentioned melancholy, which is definitely right, rather than sad, I think, for the final piece. We wanted it to be a kind of, Louis had a really tough life. There's sort of no two ways about that. And we couldn't ignore that, obviously. But at the same time, there is a sense of completion. He definitely is at a space that is better than he has been for so much of the film by the end. So I think the important thing for that final cue is to try and balance both of those halves. We wanted it. He's basically looking back on his entire life, and that involves all the amazing moments as well as the, really terrible and the really sad moments. And I think that's what was really important with that final cue to really try and bring out. So yeah, I think melancholy, but hopefully not. Yeah, melancholy, but hopefully not depressing.
Yeah, that's a very fine line. But thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to bring you back for our group panel chat shortly.
Thank you very much.
I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Kris Bowers, composer for King Richard. Kris, you've reunited with director Ronaldo Green, who you worked with on Monsters and Men. What do you most value about working with him?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me. Ray and I worked together, I guess I was maybe even 6 years or so ago on Monsters and Men, and I feel like we got incredibly close working on that, not only as friends, but also creatively. Just the way that we ended up working was, he was in New York and I went out there for a decent amount of time and spent time working with him on a daily basis, kind of setting up a studio with him in the room. And same here in LA, he came out here and we spent some time together, and we just kind of created a pretty easeful way of communicating and really a huge sense of trust, which I feel like is one of the toughest things to develop with a collaborator. It can be a really tough thing to develop with a collaborator. And so when you've spent that time to build a trust to the level that we had, once we worked on a project like this, it was really nice to just kind of fall back into that and have that secondhand communication with each other.
Isn't it true that with composers, particularly if you don't have that space where you can really kind of shine or fly and just do things that are maybe a slightly outside of the comfort zone, then you don't have the same, creativity. Like, for example, when you're a costume designer, a production designer, you're working in pre-production, you're working throughout the production. Composers usually come towards the end. Is it challenging when you don't have that relationship with the director to do something kind of special, or do you find that it just depends on the film?
It really depends on the director or how you guys interact with one another. I mean, it's all, interpersonal dynamics. And I feel like there's so many times where the director is trusting you with their creative baby in so many ways. And so they're also trusting each of their department heads to be able to translate any sort of emotional idea that they have into that craft, into that medium. And I feel like that can be a scary thing for a director, especially depending on where they are or what this piece means to them or any of those things. And so as they're sharing this space with each of us and asking us to contribute in very specific emotional ways, I feel like it takes a lot for them to be able to just trust somebody they don't really know. And so building that trust quickly really depends on how much, how that communication feels, how comfortable we feel with one another. But it's the same as building any sort of dynamic with like a new person that you're meeting, and, you know, trying to develop some sort of friendship essentially.
Yeah. Let's drill down a little into some of the tracks on this score. I love scores that mix ambient and percussive sounds, and so, because sometimes it can really not work. In this film, it certainly does. It's very ambitious in how it layers a number of complementary sounds and rhythms, and a great example is the plan. It's very evocative and immersive. And it's a great score to listen to with headphones because of the way that you are able to kind of mix it. Can you talk us through mixing ambient and percussive sounds and why you went in that direction for this film?
Yeah, I think I decided pretty early on to limit the palette to something that felt like it could relate to not only the sport of tennis, but also the way that the film felt. And so, and how we could, you know, have those things represent both this family and also Venus and Serena themselves, and how much of a force they were when they came into the game, and how much they changed the way that the sport felt in so many different ways. And so pretty early on, I limited it to just strings, harp, piano, prepared piano and percussion, and, you know, wanting to be really specific and intentional with how those things are used, especially the percussion and prepared piano, just making sure that, you know, the percussion comes in moments where you really see these young women step into their power and really, you know, play the game in a very forceful way that we hadn't really seen before. And then the prepared piano is kind of a light version of that that's palpable throughout so much of the story. And those sounds kind of coming together, I think, made me feel like there was enough room to then have a little bit of synthetic element to give a bit of ambiance to the whole sound of the score.
Let's talk about how you mix electronic and ambient together with orchestral sounds. It's a lot of composers these days have gone in that direction, but honestly, sometimes it doesn't feel organic and it feels strange, which maybe might work for the film. In this instance, I think it's extremely effective because you're going for something a bit more ambitious. Can you talk us through the fusing of orchestral and electronic, and whether or not you have to emphasize one over the other depending on what is happening in the scene?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like because so much of the story is about the heart and warmth of this family dynamic and the support that these parents are showing their kids, and, you know, the heart of these young girls. So I feel like the focus was really on that feeling, which will, for me at least, come from something that feels organic, even if it is ultimately something that's synthetic as far as the instrumentation. But I always like something, especially for this score, that feels like it's a little unplaceable, whether or not it's organic or electronic. And so because of that, I feel like the organic elements are leading a bit more, just because, you know, anything electronic is really just to emphasize what's organic and to kind of like create a bit of a like texture around it. But you know, there are a couple of moments, like the moment where he's trying to find these gang members and kind of searching the city, or you know, the moment later in the final match where there are some electronic elements that become even more palpable, and those are like in these moments of tension in the film. But for the most part, the organic is always leading.
Yeah, and then there are great tracks like Hitting and Practice, where the score is quite propulsive, and to me it sounded quite charged, and I think which was quite fitting for scoring the sporty side of the film. And you mentioned the tennis element. You could have gone in a really kind of, to be honest, cliched way and just kind of done something that was a bit back and forth, like the tennis match, but you didn't do that, thank God. So can you talk us through the challenges of trying to score for a sport film or scenes that involve sport without going down a cliched route, because it could have happened?
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest reasons why it didn't happen is, obviously not only following Resurrection, but Pam Martin, the editor, had already cut these matches in a way that felt so clear what the arc of the game was. And it's pretty fascinating that there's no commentary at all in any of the games. And so the only way you know how the game is going is by the reactions or how the game feels pace wise and all of that. And so noticing how she was changing the pace of the hitting in certain moments, and how she chose when she chose to slow things down, it really made it very clear how the music should be supporting those things and where we should be landing emotionally. And so having these very specific points where we knew there was a shift here, and when this point is lost or won, there's a big shift that needs to happen there tonally. And when she has this look with her father, this needs to happen. And so looking more for these emotional beats that happen within the way that Pam cut those matches kind of gave these pillars that I can focus on. And then otherwise, rhythmically, always wanting to have something that felt as unpredictable as the game is when you watch it play. Because what I always find fascinating about tennis is that, like you said, yeah, it is this back and forth, but the rhythm is always there's so much syncopation to the rhythm because of how much they're trying to knock the other off balance, right? Like anytime that there's this predictable rhythm, pretty soon somebody's going to do something that kind of changes that and creates a different kind of like almost like an odd bar essentially in my mind. And so I think that made it so that I wanted to approach so many of those sections where there's a lot of those sections are in 5 or in these odd time signatures, just because to me it felt more fun to have something that felt rhythmically unpredictable. And even if it might be in 5, it also there are constant syncopations and ways that I'm trying to throw it off so we don't really know where the downbeat is, essentially, just because that's how the game feels as it's being played. So I feel like creating those pillars and then finding some sort of way to create a motor that feels as undulating as the game is, and then following that emotional map was the way that those things kind of came together.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And I just think, to me, it just sounds like way more challenging than perhaps you're even giving credit for. It's really quite effective. My final question is about how a lot of your most well-known work is on projects that focus on the experience of people of color against a more general backdrop of society at large, like Green Book and Bridgerton and Dear White People and When They See Us, Billie Holiday, and now King Richard. Obviously, you're attracted to telling those kinds of stories from a personal perspective, but have you found that you do get attracted to that kind of story when you're looking for your next project?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of, it happens to be the projects being made by the filmmakers that I'm lucky to like partner with often, just because that's what's important to all of us. So I feel like working with Ray or working with Ava DuVernay or Justin Simien, those kinds of projects are projects that that they're passionate about, and then I always feel fortunate that they look at me as a collaborator that they want to continue to work with. And ultimately, yeah, it is a big thing. I think the thing that I love about all these stories is that they're human stories above anything else, right? And so I think that when you look at a story like King Richard, it was very personally moving for me, just looking at these Black parents and what it took for them to be able to give their kids the lifestyle that they could have. It just reminded me of my own parents, or also just any parent in general that's in that position. So many Black parents that for their children to be successful did everything that they could to make that possible, even whatever they had to sacrifice themselves. And so I feel like me thinking about how my parents did that for me, and my parents actually decided they wanted me to play piano before I was born, and they found teachers all around the city, and they didn't go to college themselves. Like they put everything that they could into me being a musician, and now being at the age where I can look at that from a different perspective and start to think about the idea of being a parent and what that must have taken me. I just feel like I was in a very specific place working on this film, thinking about how I could really empathize with Richard and Oracene and what they were doing for their kids, and also at the same time feel this great sense of appreciation for any parent that does that for their children.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the key to this film, and I think that's probably why people are going to really gravitate towards it. Kris, thank you so much for your time today. We'll bring you back shortly for our group panel chat.
Sure, appreciate it.
I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Daniel Pemberton, composer for The Rescue. Now, Daniel, The Rescue chronicles this enthralling, against all odds, story that transfixed us all a few years ago when those boys and their coach were rescued from deep inside a cave in Thailand. Can you talk us through some of the ways in which your score helps ratchet up the tension, particularly as the film lays out how these boys were actually rescued?
Yeah, I mean, like, this film was a really intriguing challenge because I was a big fan of Chai and Jimmy's last film, Free Solo, which was fantastic cinematic film, and obviously got these massive shots in that of mountains. It's got a very vast cinematic scale, whereas cave diving is darkness. It's just a lot of darkness and brown. I was chatting to some of the divers the other day and they're just like, it's just brown. It's a world of brown. And so with the film, I've got to try and like capture a lot of the claustrophobia and the tension of the experience that's not necessarily always on screen, or like amplify the stuff on screen. And it was one where sometimes with my scores, I try and make them sort of very bold, but this one, it was very much supportive and sort of trying to really push you through that experience on the through the journey in the story of the film.
Yeah, I was transfixed by the footage of the kids being pulled out of the cave. And it's no spoiler, we know what happens to these kids. The sound mix includes that cable news reports and applause by local onlookers, and then your ambient contemplative score underneath that sound mix that gives those scenes real emotional weight. Without a score, it just would not have been the same. What were you going for in those really pivotal parts of the film?
Well, it was an interesting challenge because a lot of the film is just like it's about an hour and a half of score, and it's probably about an hour 23 minutes of tension, and it's you know, it's a very odd challenge, this film, in the sense that everyone kind of goes into it and most people know what the end result is. Yet it's still, I can watch this film over and over again. It's such a fascinating story and journey. And so it's really to try, you know, the thing that you're really trying to do is get the audience into the mind of what's happening at that moment on screen and in the divers' recollections of those like days. So, you know, I'm often in this one, like I say, I'm trying to like take a sort of a backseat. So you're experiencing that adventure, but through sound, you know, where sometimes there's a lot of footage or it's just talking heads. And so if the film feels as exciting as the stories are telling, then hopefully the music has done its job.
Absolutely. And then the score, of course, to me, really shines through at the end when these brave rescuers are being awarded all these medals, and including from the Queen and Prince William. It's very uplifting. And I love asking composers about creating uplifting work, because sometimes you're doing, you know, really strange or otherworldly sounds, or you're doing something that's really melancholy, but this is uplifting towards the end. What is the key to a score that makes you feel happy and like joy? What's the key?
It helps that the story is like, by the end, insanely uplifting. And also you've gone through, like I say, like almost an hour and a half of just extreme tension. And so to your previous question, which I didn't really answer properly, was the fact that there's a few key moments, which is them finding the boys, the first boy coming out, and then the very end, it's all kind of like building, and then there's a release at the end. And so from a kind of like arc point of view, musically, it was, you know, that's what I think makes the release of the end so like exciting and joyous, because you've gone through such an intense musical experience beforehand that the release at the end hopefully like gives you that kind of you know, emotional high. But then another big part of that is, I'm trying to build up towards the song at the end. And, I've been trying to incorporate elements of that song, Believe, earlier in those last moments. So by the time it does come in, it feels as one with the score.
Yeah, it really does. But I didn't actually see it coming. I didn't know that there was going to be a song at the end. And that's the song that you co-wrote with Gary Go and Aloe Black, who also sings the track. It plays over the end credits. And it's just, it's a great song. Like, congratulations on creating a beautiful song that really fits in with the documentary. Did that come quickly? Was it a difficult song to kind of get right? Talk us through that one.
Yeah, I mean, that was very much through Chai, one of the directors. She really wanted like an unashamedly optimistic and hopeful track to end the film on. And we tried a bunch of different ideas on that, but she kept pushing for something that was, was really, really celebratory. And like the lyric from it comes through one of the lines of one of the American divers, who weirdly I got drunk with the other night because they were over here. And he says, there's a line in the film, but there's two things in the film. When the divers see the boys for the first time, they just say believe. That's all. It's the first words they say to the kids, and they say it over and over again because I think they're as shocked to see the kids as the kids are to see them. So the diver, Rick Stanton, he's just saying, believe, believe. And then later in the film, the US Marine, Derek, they say this job is impossible, and he goes, well, what if we can achieve the impossible? And Chai always loved that idea of, like anything is possible, if you can believe in the impossible. And so that's kind of where the song started off, around that idea. And Aloe we'd all been separately trying to come up with different ideas, and Aloe came up with this really strong chorus that Chai absolutely loved. And so we worked together, turning that into a bigger piece and like fitting more of the story into the song. And that was like all done over Zoom. Aloe was in Australia, I was in London, Gary was not in London, and we'd work on Zooms. I would cycle around Gary's house at ungodly hours because he works very late. Me, which was really fun actually, because it's quite, most of the time I'm on my own, so it was really nice to have a collaborator in London as well as Aloe in Australia, and just be flying things backwards and forth all the time until we got to the end place.
It's I'm just picturing Aloe singing that at the Oscars next year. It's a really strong track, and it's really fitting in with the whole film. It reminds me that many people forget that documentary features often feature beautiful music. We forget that because we just expect them to be very black and white. And you've worked on documentaries in the past, but I know you've mostly for your narrative feature work. Are there any significant differences to working in those two genres?
Yeah, I mean, my start as a composer was in documentaries. I started off weirdly doing TV music when I was 17, which is quite random. And I scored my first documentary when I was still at school. A very nice director called Paul Wilmshurst got me to score a TV show, which I had no idea what I was doing. And then I worked in like British documentaries for about like 20 years. And I think there's something about real life and real stories and real humanity, which is really powerful, which is difficult to beat in a drama if the story is strong. And I think, with this film, with The Rescue, because you have got such a powerful, emotional and real story, it touches you in a way that the drama can't, I think. And from a scoring point of view, it's very different. Like with this one, like I say, I'm kind of like more of a supporting part of the puzzle, where it's really important you feel this journey, but the music isn't necessarily as in your face as it would be on, let's say, if I was scoring Spider-Verse or something like that, where the music is so upfront. Here, it's about trying to make the film as successful as possible as an experience. And because stuff is changing so quickly, and there's a lot of music in this film, you know, you're trying to be sort of sometimes unobtrusive, so you don't always notice the score, but you're feeling it all the time. And then the bits where I really want you to feel it, that's when it becomes kind of more musical or kind of more upfront.
Yeah, to me, to the untrained ear, it's like it would be a completely different discipline, because it is almost subliminal in some ways, and yet it's very visceral, and it really does allow you to feel what they're going through.
Here's some of the key. This is a bowl of rocks, which I actually used for like trying to make some of the.
I love it.
Some of the rhythms, like it's more like I just wanted to get something that like felt very visceral and claustrophobic and uncomfortable, which is a weird thing to write, because often, you know, you want to write music that's, I'm not going to say pleasant to listen to, but this score was almost trying to make it as uncomfortable as possible in some places, yet not to a level that's going to like hurt the film.
Absolutely, and I think you absolutely achieved that, Daniel. So thank you so much for your time today. We're going to bring you back shortly for our group panel chat.
No problems. Bye.
I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Debbie, here with Jeymes "The Bullet" Samuel, director, writer, producer, and composer for his new film and feature directorial debut, The Harder They Fall. Jeymes, everyone wants to talk about this, but I think we really can't ignore that while the events of this film are fictional, and you make it quite clear, you're very clear about these people existed, right? You're bringing balance to this genre, and it's about bloody time. Talk us through why you wanted to spotlight people of color and women in this genre.
Well, because, you know, growing up, I loved Westerns, right? I've loved them my whole life. Pretty much, they were the soundtrack to my childhood. Like, growing up in London, a Western is always on television. If it's in the day, it would be one of the soap operas. You know, you're home from school and reruns of Bonanza are on it. And then, you know, in the evenings, your parents are just watching all of these movies, these cool movies. Not even in the evening, sometimes in the day. And I loved them. I was addicted to Westerns since I was a kid, and I loved the scenery, the landscape, and I loved the stories. But then you get older and you wonder why you're not seeing yourself in those movies, or everyone that looks like you or everyone of color is subservient or treated less than human, or is always given a reason why they're there. Like, if you're black, you're an ex-slave. And after a while, you can't turn away from these things. And then you look at all the women characters in these Westerns in that genre, and they were always subservient, which is totally unrealistic to man and to life. And so I really started just learning more and more about the Old West as I got older. And I'd find out all of these amazing characters that really existed, of color and women of all colors. And as I started writing, I just basically started like making little short films and putting these characters in it and making fictional tales, utilizing these real characters. And then about 10 years ago, I wrote and directed a short film called They Die by Dawn. It was a Western. It starred Michael K. Williams, the late, great Michael K.
Yeah.
Rosario Dawson, Erykah Badu, Jesse Williams, Isaiah Washington, Nate Parker, Roger Guenveur-Smith, Harry Lennox, Bokeem Woodbine, Giancarlo Esposito. I put all these amazing actors in this short film. I shot the short film, and then I just went about for the next 10 years, you know, getting The Harder They Fall made, where I can bring all of those amazing real characters back and bring it home and blast the rooftops of everything we've come to know and learn about the Old West. Bring balance to the force.
bring balance to the force. It's about bloody time.
Thank you, brother.
And so you sit down to watch this film. I didn't know what really to expect, although I had seen your previous short, so I had some idea that it was going to be, you know, a pretty visceral experience. The title sequence at the outset is a complete stunner. It's coupled with this track, Guns Go Bang, by Kid Cudi and Jay-Z, who's obviously very involved in the soundtrack and score of this film. Why did you ultimately decide to go with that kind of track as the grand opener to this film?
Because the song itself, one, you know, soundtracks these days a lot of times are just glorified compilation albums, right? There's a bunch of songs, they might have one or two that have something to do with the movie, but really it's just a bunch of songs that have nothing to do, and they could be on any, you know, any album. But every song, I wrote all the songs on the soundtrack, right? And I composed the score. So every single song is a direct thought of a particular scene and of a particular place in time. Every song on the album. And My Guns Go Bang, something I wrote with Kid Cudi and Jay, and the first lines is Avalon be damned, I ventured far and land, I laid my sword in the sand, I made my peace with man. You're talking about Nat Love. That's where Nat Love is after he kills the guy in the church, Jesus Cortez, and he's made his peace with man. He's saying they lay a violent feast as far as eyes can see. I hunt the golden fleece. I hope you've made your peace. And he starts talking about what would happen if you bring him back to that place. Come to find out, he soon gets brought to that place, and hence the harder they fall. But the song itself has everything to do with the movie. And also Jay-Z, in 12 bars, he rhymes the entire story of the film, right? That 17 would switch, it'll change it. Mama always said you was an angel. Papa got ghosts, but those walls never came through. It's real statement to onset the film with. And I love great openings, right? I love great openings like the classic Bond openings, but this is the opening of The Harder They Fall. I wanted to make a statement. I also wanted visually to show who the characters are playing. I haven't had that properly since like The Sting with Robert Redford and Paul Newman. Like Regina King as Trudy Smith, Idris Elba as Rufus Buck, Jonathan Majors as Nat Love. I love that thing. So My Guns Go Bang just fits with everything and tells the story of where we are at that particular point in time of the tale. Exactly where it comes in is exactly where we are. So it's perfect for me.
Yeah, to me, it was like a palate cleanser. It was like, okay, buckle in, because this is going to be
a hell of a ride.
And it was.
Yeah,
your background and grounding in music production and composition is so obvious in your choices you make as a director and writer. For example, you have brought together some really interesting artists like Fatoumata Jawara and Barrington Levy, and people that I've not really heard of before, but now I'm seeking out on Spotify and just to wonder, like, who are these people? What was the thinking in bringing in artists from parts of Africa and the Caribbean and the UK? Why did you do it that way?
I wanted to show how one, and how one. I wanted to show the oneness of what everything is. How you can have a reggae track. Barrington Levy is literally down below me, rehearsing for the jump off we have on Wednesday. Literally, that's him playing in the background in New York. I wanted to show how the same we all are, how similar we all are, whether it's Fatoumata Diawara from Mali, or Myra Andrade from Cape Verde, Jay-Z from Brooklyn, Barrington Levy from Jamaica, Laura Mvula from the UK, Jadakiss from Yonkers.
Yeah.
And to show how the oneness of how everything is, and the palette that it fits on with a Western underneath, and how it's just all seamless, especially if it all comes from one person. It's like a complete thought. But in my head, the sounds of Jay-Z goes on the exact same dish as the sounds of the South African opera singer Pretty End, right? It goes on the exact same dish as Jadakiss and Conway the Machine, which goes on the exact same in the exact same dish as CeeLo and Lauryn Hill. So it's all one complete thought.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in terms of the music for this film, obviously there are some beautiful Western touches and motifs, which is important to kind of bring us into this genre, but it's also very pulsating, percussive hip hop aesthetic, which could have crashed and burned. It really could have, but it doesn't. Talk us through the balance that you strike between going back to recognizable Western motifs and then something new and fresh that actually works and doesn't feel anachronistic at all.
Well, what we have to do is look at what we regard as Western motifs. So if we look at, say, Rio Bravo with John Wayne, right, and Dean Martin, when Dean Martin sings, "My rifle, my pony, and me on the way to the river," Jesse James and Billy the Kid never heard any such song. That wasn't cowboy music. When we listen to "Ride 'em Up, Get 'em Up, then Rawhide," Billy the Kid and Wild Bill Hickok didn't hear anything like that. When we hear Ennio Morricone go, ding, 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 ha, 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 with they win, with they win. Pat Garrett and Jesse James and the coward Robert Ford, the assassination of Jesse James. Jesse James never heard anything like the electric guitar. In fact, I doubt he heard of electricity.
That's right.
So those aren't Western motifs. Those were modern music that Hollywood will put behind it. But because we look at it like, it's like when we say the Old West, right, Robert? No cowboy lived in the Old West. It was old when Hollywood made those movies. They lived in the New West, in the New Frontier, the New America. What they were using, as far as they were concerned, was FaceTime and the iPhones and Apple. They were technologically advanced as far as they were concerned. So I looked at that and I thought about it, and I didn't, while I love the big orchestral, I love what Elmer Bernstein did to Magnificent Seven. I love those big scores and the big themes. And so while I keep those like the big orchestra, I do something different with it. I take a trip to Jamaica and put dub under it. Do, 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 do. Jing, 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 jing. Oh, do, 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 do. Jing, 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 jing. Oh, do, 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 do. Jing, 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 jing. Oh. It's a total different feel, and it sounds modern, but it's, to me, it's just as cowboy as "My Rifle, My Pony, and Me."
Yeah.
Which wasn't, you understand what I'm saying?
I 100% know what you're saying, and that is so dope. It's so true. Jeymes, we've run out of time, man. But I want to bring you back now for our group panel chat. But I really thank you, and congrats on a great soundtrack and film.
Thank you so much, my brother.
No worries.
One down, forever to go. Let's go.
That's it. I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold JB. Welcome to our Gold JB Film Composers panel. I'm here with Marius de Vries, composer for Coda, Arthur Sharpe, composer for The Electrical Life of Louis Wain, Kris Bowers, composer for King Richard, Daniel Pemberton, composer for The Rescue, and Jeymes Samuel, writer, director, producer, and composer for The Harder They Fall. Guys, you're all really experienced composers now. You've been in the business for some time. What do you wish you knew when you first started out about the ups and downs that you do know now? I'm going to go to you first, Daniel.
Okay, well, I would, if I could go back in time to myself, I would have lent even further into my limitations at the time, and have, rather than, I started out with like just one keyboard and a tape machine in my bedroom, and I was always trying to make those sort of sound bigger than they were sometimes, like what I was trying to do. And actually I should have gone with what I had and made more things that were like just what I could make with that equipment, because I always find that really exciting, like having limitations and forcing yourself into corners to compose out of. And I would have probably told myself to stop trying to make like hip hop breaks that on a bad drum machine that just sound lame.
I bet you they sound dope. I bet if you listen to those joints now, they sound dope.
No, they don't. They're like, it was on a Boss DR 550, and the only way I made them sound dope was I basically had a 4-track and I just gain it up way too loud so they distorted. And that's the only way I could get compression. Actually, they do sound right now.
I'm telling you, I bet you they sound nuts.
Probably do. James, what about you?
I don't, well, it's different because I direct, right? So I pretty much, with this film, I never had someone over me telling me, and I've got a rule to just obey your crazy, right? And just like as soon when you get an idea, no matter how crazy it is, you'll see when you watch. Oh, you've watched the film, Rob?
Oh yeah.
Like when they robbed the bank in the White Town. My rule is like however bonkers the idea is, I have to execute it, whether it's sonically or visually. You know, I was producing Jay Electronica's album for the past 10 years because he refused to release it. So when you work with someone like Jay Electronica, I see Kris laughing because he knows, right? You know the legend of Jay Electronica. So when you work with someone like Jay Electronica, you literally have to be nuts. Like you have to go to every single crazy place. So I mean, the only thing I wish that I knew was that there was this creature from space called the coronavirus coming, who literally rips all your plans apart. They say when you're making a movie, you always hear this thing, Murphy's Law, whatever can go wrong will go wrong. And then Murphy caught COVID-19, died, and now that's just COVID's law. So even when I'm making music, all the musicians, I got an elite sniper squad, like downstairs right now. I got Jerry Wonder from the Fugees, Dre Harris, James Poyser from the Roots, and this and that and the other. But I had to do all of this melodic cooking with everyone in different places. This is madness. That's not how I envisaged doing the music for my debut film. COVID just came and bum rushed the show. So I wish like I knew that was coming. I would have prepped even more because you can't, you know, you're thinking you're a tough guy, like I'm ready. And then this thing, you have to direct your movie, wearing a mask, goggles, face mask, can't stand closer than 6 feet to all your actors, and you have to do the music like every night. Go home and it was mad. It's COVID, so that's the only thing I could say. It effed me up, but
that bloody coronavirus that screwed everybody. Kris, what about you? What do you wish you knew way back in the day when you were just a young composer, very young, still young?
I feel like definitely the things that the guys mentioned so far. I feel like for me, probably a combination of understanding all the other elements outside of writing music that go into this job. I feel like when I was a touring musician, we used to always talk to younger musicians about the fact that like you don't get paid for playing the show. You get paid for like going to the airport and like late, nights and like early lobby calls and like all of the difficult parts of the job, or dealing with personalities on the road, like all those kinds of things. And I feel like similarly, the music, when the environment is set up to just create in a way where you can kind of access, you're crazy, like James was saying, I feel like those are the best environments, and in the times where you don't have control over that environment, or when it's maybe not set up to be exactly that, it's always interesting to figure out how to navigate those things and still keep yourself sane, essentially. And I feel like knowing myself a bit better when I was younger, I probably would have been able to filter out the BS a little bit easier, be able to filter out the things that kind of get in the way of just creating and trying to focus on that, and knowing how to still navigate everything else without it being a hindrance or kind of choking that process. So I feel like, just knowing all the things outside of writing the music and how those things can affect your own headspace, and then therefore how to like know myself well enough to like navigate that internal dialogue and internal struggle. Yeah,
that is, I think that would be actually something for a lot of professions, and that gift of hindsight as well. Arthur, what about you? Is there something that you can pinpoint back in the day that you wish you knew back then?
I mean, back in the day wasn't that long ago for me, really. Still.
You're still so young. Yeah.
I guess I think one thing that you come to discover once you enter this world is just how many people are amazing at what they do. Like the musicians, you know, I'm sure I've experienced the least out of everyone here, but the number of musicians out there who are just unbelievable at what they can bring, you know, to your project, and how much you want to trust them, and how much you want to try and seek these people out and find them and write for them and so on. I think in some way I almost, you know, I think part of me wished I'd known that world existed to such an extent when I was sort of first starting out. I mean, admittedly, with a much tinier music budget than I had, for example, on this film, but even so. So I guess that to some extent, and maybe just how enormous music is generally. Like at the time, I just felt like I didn't know anything about music, you know, like theoretically or anything. Like I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I definitely had massive imposter syndrome. I mean, I still do. I think everyone does to some extent. But
That's for sure.
you know, you carry on teaching yourself, and you carry on learning. And I wish back then I knew that I would still, at this stage, having learned so much more, still essentially feel like I know nothing, and sort of like an amateur almost in terms of how much is out there. I guess those two things.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I totally hear what you're saying. Finally, Marius, what about you? What would you have said to your younger self?
Well, I'd like to agree with Arthur that starting off from a position where you admit that you know nothing is a very strong starting point. I guess one of the hardest lessons in terms of personal satisfaction is that the only thing that really matters in the end is the joy that you get from doing the work with the people you're doing it with, and in connection with that, not to pay too much attention to bad outcomes and bad reviews, which leads on to the fact that you equally can't pay too much attention to good outcomes and good reviews for the same reason. And finally, we all get fired eventually.
Yeah, for sure. We've all been there.
You need a thick skin for that.
Yeah, you know what I mean? That's like, make like me, just hire yourself.
That's it. That's the key.
Movie,
you can even get fired then.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly right. Imagine if you did, that would be terrifying. My final question to everybody is my favorite question, especially for composers, given I'm such a nerd for this stuff. What's your favorite piece of work, film score, or if you can't pinpoint one, maybe composer? Everybody has one if you're into this. I know straight away mine is like 1992, Michael Nyman, The Piano. I listen to it almost every week. I love it for various reasons. What about you guys? Jeymes, what about you first? What's something that inspires you as a piece of work that you think is wonderful?
Oh man, there's so many, man. Lalo Schifrin's like score for Bullet. Elmer, if I had to choose one off the rip, Magnificent Seven, man. What a piece of music, man. Like the and even the motifs are under it is like a and that rhythm right there is the underlying rhythm for so much black music. It's one of the hard. Every time I listen to it, I wanna cry. Like it's just hard.
Yeah. See what music does, especially film music. Yeah. Okay, who else? Who's got something straight away? Well, I'm not even gonna.
I've got one that is in the Western Territory as well. Although really, I once saw Elmer Bernstein give a talk, and he was really old, and he literally kind of moonwalked onto stage like this, just doing bullets.
Oh my God, like a G.
I was like, oh my God, if I have any of that energy at that age, even like a tenth, I am in 100.
Like a G.
Yeah, he was
very good.
Like a G.
Mine is Navajo Joe by Ennio Morricone. Absolutely mental piece of music. That's this kind of one voice that kind of goes, ah. Everyone knows Good, Bad, and the Ugly. This is just like full force screaming, which is my kind of mental. And then it just comes in with this massive guitar line that goes bow, 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 bow. And then these big drums. And it's so bold. and so mental and works so well. It's kind of one of those things that presses all my buttons, because that's my favorite kind of film music that kind of like punches you in the face. But you know, every film is different, but that's one that really does it for me.
Well, this is turning into a Morricone love fest, and it's very hard.
Wow.
Very hard not to choose Once Upon a Time in the West for me, but if I had a gun up my head, I'd go for Artemyev's score for Stalker, I think. That's the one I go back to the most.
That's a good one. And is there a reason? Is it just because does it trigger something in you, or is it just
I think I watched it at a very, very vulnerable age, and so it kind of wormed its way in there, and
that's
it's just a film I go back to again and again, and I find it weirdly comforting. For such a dark film, it's strange to feel that it's comforting, but for me it is.
There you go. What about you, Arthur?
I mean, if I was going to give you a Morricone one, since everyone else is, I do also love Once Upon a Time in the West, but also his Once Upon a Time in America work is unbelievable. I think it might be Deborah's theme is an unbelievable piece of music. I don't know about a single piece of music, but right now I think is it Mika Levy? Is that how you pronounce her name?
Yeah.
I think I would. She may be the only composer where I would seek out a film if I found out she's done a score and watch it purely to hear what she's done now, kind of thing. I think she's unbelievable and sort of single-handedly moved scoring forwards several steps in her few films that she's done.
Yeah, she's still so young in her career, and she's incredible. Kris, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would second that. I feel like the score to Zolo was like the craziest thing I've ever heard. It was pretty dope. As far as like a single score, maybe Vertigo, I feel like is one that I always go to. The love theme. Yeah, for sure.
It's so classic. Beautiful.
You know,
and
I saw, can I say, it's so hard not to just fan out at like even the people I'm sitting with. Like I got the composer Into the Spider-Verse, Kick-Ass. Like I saw King Richard in London. Like, oh man, like, you guys are doing crazy work. I just want to say that I watched the 35mm print of Vertigo the other day. Right?
Oh yeah. I
took Jonathan Majors with me, and it's the first time I've seen it in like years. And Jimmy Stewart is a horrible guy. You have to watch it again, Kris. Like when you watch Breakfast at Tiffany's as an adult, you go, wow, Holly Golightly, you're a horrible woman. Like, Vertigo, I was like, oh my God. Anyway, I just wanted to fan out over
like a weird stalker. The whole film is really odd. And it's the music that makes the film so magnetic and magic.
It's amazing. And you're like, this stalking, crazy person. Anyway, amazing film. One of my favorites.
It is. And see the power of a good score, mate. It just, there's nothing quite like it. And on that note, pardon the pun, or not, I want to thank you all very much for joining us today. This was a really awesome experience and opportunity to speak to 5 incredible composers. Congrats on some great work. Good luck this award season. You're all amazing. And thanks again for your time.
Thank you guys, man. And I'm fans of like all you guys. It's a real eclectic bunch. You guys are, that score for Kick-Ass was nuts. And also, I just want to say one thing.
We had 4 composers for that, so it's not.
It doesn't matter. I don't care. Like whatever you've done, it was wicked. And we've gone. It's almost like we don't celebrate the score no more, right? Like remember when we were kids, you'd leave the theater going. If I say dun 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 dun, we'd see something, man. Do you know how much my son sings the score for Into the Spider-Verse?
Really?
What a beautiful piece of work, man! I want to tell you guys, like this is an awesome game. Imagine if we all got together and done something.
Can you do that soon? Get together and just kill it. Yeah, meet up in London. Yeah, do it. I think you should. But 100%. Yeah, such great work. It's such a pleasure it was a real pleasure to prepare for this one because the work was just incredible and I really enjoyed it. So thank you so much again.